What's up, guys? Welcome back to Sunday Sports Club podcast with Allison Kuch, a podcast all about sports told by a woman, and that woman is me. Hi, guys. Welcome to episode 1 of season 2 of Sunday Sports Club podcast. I am so excited to have you here all throughout football season and even after football season because unlike season 1, we're going to be talking about all sports. I don't care if it's basketball, baseball, if it has a ball, it's included. If it doesn't have a ball, we're still going to be talking about it. Joking at my words, talking about balls. Okay, I'm so excited to have you guys here. Today in episode 1, we're going to be talking all about NFL preseason because it's currently happening in the NFL. We're going to be touching on NFL cut day, the infamous cut day. I dread that day every single year except this year, which speaking of guys losing their jobs, we're going to talk about my husband because I haven't recorded a podcast since my husband got fired 2 weeks before I gave birth. Is he going to be playing football this year? What team is he going to be on? Is he retiring? We're going to be touching on all of that in today's episode. So let's get into it. If you guys are new to this podcast, I'm so excited that you're here. If you're coming back to this podcast, I'm even more excited because that means you're loyal. But for the people who are listening to this, I'm excited you're here, but I don't know why you're here. Now, maybe you're here because you've seen me cry on the internet. That's a great reason that you might be here. Maybe you're here because you like sports and you want to know more. Maybe you know absolutely nothing about sports and you're like, I need to know something because my boyfriend keeps watching these games, like what's going on. Maybe you're here because Taylor Swift influenced you, which speaking of Taylor Swift and influencing, are we all going to act like she didn't see my TikToks and that's why she's with a professional athlete? Like, I definitely influenced her to start dating Travis Kelce. No, I'm fucking with you guys. Maybe you want to be an NFL wife, which I would not recommend that. Being an NFL wife, or as some people like to call us, wags. Please never refer to me as a wag. For those of you who don't know, what is a wag? A wag is a wife or girlfriend of a professional athlete. Although my husband is in the NFL, I am not a wag because a wag in my head, they have a Pinterest board of outfit ideas. They are wearing stilettos or pumps. They drive a G-Wagon. I went to my husband's football game last season and I had my pants unbuttoned before the game even started. So I mean, granted, I was pregnant, but I just would never consider myself a wag. I feel like it has a negative connotation, but hey, if you want to be a wag, you can be a wag. I have nothing against girls with Pinterest boards. I'm just kind of jealous because my Pinterest board dried out like year 3 of my husband playing in the NFL. So just to recap, season 1 of Sunday Sports Club, we talked about the rules of football, the game of football. Like if you knew nothing about football, you would listen to that. If you would ever consider buying the book, Football for Dummies, you would want to listen to season 1, and it's still up. If you guys want to go and listen, get a refresher course before the football season begins, I highly suggest doing that. But in season 2 of this podcast, we are getting a little bit juicier. And when I say juicy, I mean, there are like these big headlines that you guys see. Oh, so-and-so signs $400 million. And you're like, what? Yeah, these contracts in the NFL are huge. But I want to get even deeper than just these headlines. I want to talk about why there's drama surrounding some of these contracts. I'm going to talk about how much these guys are getting paid. And then maybe we'll have his wife on, which speaking of women in and around the sports world, it is such an iconic time. I'm talking about Simone Biles, Taylor Swift, Brittany Mahomes. These women are just some of many that I hope to have on this podcast. And, you know, when we're really down bad, we'll have on my husband too. No offense to Isaac listening to this. But if he's not listening, then you got to do what you got to do. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, why are you qualified as a woman to have a sports podcast? Surprise, surprise. I know a little something about football and a little something about sports, but honestly, I feel like I have such a unique perspective to sports because I've seen the behind the scenes and I know what questions to ask to get answers to things that you guys didn't even know existed. And I'm talking about I've been there for my husband through the high highs, him getting drafted to the NFL, him starting in games, him being an honorary captain. And I've also been there during the low lows, one of the low lows, quite literally being my husband not allowing me to buy hangers, $3 hangers. We were that down bad. I mean, granted, my husband did end up getting cut when he wasn't allowing me to buy hangers. Speaking of hangers, if you guys want to go and leave this podcast a 5-star review so my husband can retire and I can stop worrying about hangers, go right ahead. But no, I truly have learned that the NFL is a business. There are so many politics that go into not only the NFL and football, but also sports in general. So when it comes to having on guests and interviewing other people, I feel like I have a good perspective on like questions to ask, like how to compare football to other sports, and just getting down to the nitty gritty. I mean, football has a ton of politics that you guys don't even consider when you're watching the game. I mean, how often a guy goes into a game can be determined by how good he is, but it also can be determined by what round he was drafted in, if his coach likes him, how he practiced, maybe he pissed off somebody and now he's not getting a lot of playing time. There's a lot of reasons as to why players might not be playing a ton, or a lot of reasons as to why they might be playing a ton. Because if you draft somebody first round, and they're not playing, there's someone who is probably going to lose their job. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, my husband was making $100,000 every football game and he was sitting on the bench. You can't tell me there's politics in football. Not me just throwing out $100,000, but it's so interesting. So I want to come on the podcast and I want to teach you guys more so that you know more than your husband, boyfriend, any man in your life that's like, you can't like football, or like you're a pick-me girl and like trying to find an excuse as to why you're allowed to like the game of football. There are so many intricacies that a lot of people don't know, even a lot of men don't know, but I do know because I know everything. My husband knows that too. Just being there for my husband through these high highs and low lows, I've just seen so much, and I feel like it gives me a leg up versus like other commentators or other people who have sports podcasts. And I have a very unique perspective too, because when my husband lost his job, like sure, he has to go in and bring in his iPad to the team, but like, have you ever gotten kicked out of an NFL Wives group chat? Like, I literally thought we were friends, but that's just some of the many things you can plan to hear on this podcast. We'll talk about me getting kicked out of the wives group chat in a different episode, but I'm so excited that you guys are here, and whatever topics you want me to cover or like give you the beginner guide to, we're going to get down to the nitty gritty. I mean, one highly requested topic from last football season was fantasy football. We're going to be talking about that in the next episode. So feel free, if you guys have any questions or you want to hear a specific topic, head over to the Instagram, Sunday Sports Club Podcast Instagram, and slide in my DMs. No, but really, when this podcast makes it big, I'm going to request that my husband retire because I am tired of moving to places that I need a winter jacket to live in. And speaking of it getting cold, let's go ahead and jump into talking about Las Vegas. No, not because it's cold in Las Vegas. Do you not agree that it's kind of cold to fire a guy 2 weeks before his wife gives birth? All right, I'm not trying to get myself in trouble from any other NFL teams. Obviously, there's a lot of politics in the NFL, and I have my own unique perspective of being in and around the NFL. So let's dive into where I last left you guys on this podcast. Last time I recorded an episode, I was pregnant, and we were moving 2 weeks before I gave birth. So let's kind of rewind, and I'll give you a quick gist of what happened for my husband over last football season. My husband was a free agent, meaning he was not with another NFL team all last offseason. And the offseason is basically from the end of the Super Bowl all the way up until the beginning of July. That is NFL offseason. So throughout offseason, my husband was a free agent, and 24 hours before NFL training camp begins, my husband receives a call from the Las Vegas Raiders saying, "Hey, we'd love to sign you. Will you accept?" And obviously my husband's like, "Yeah, I want a fucking job." So my husband packs up the car, and not 12 hours after he gets a call from the Raiders, he is on the road and heading to Las Vegas. Now, I was, I think, like 18 or 19 weeks pregnant, so my ass was staying behind, especially knowing that NFL training camp is a super cutthroat time where a lot of guys lose their jobs. We'll talk more about the nitty gritty of NFL preseason and NFL cut day in a little bit, but essentially you're starting preseason with 90 guys, and at the end of NFL preseason, you only have 53 spots on your main roster and 16 spots on practice squad. So a lot of guys losing their jobs, a lot of wives crying on the internet. I'm usually one of them. But speaking of my husband going to NFL training camp, he went to the Vegas and was in the team hotel with all the other players trying to win a job. And I stayed back here in California, which is where our off-season home is. Off-season home, a lot of people in the NFL have off-season homes because it's really hard to be moving your shit every 6 months, although somehow me and Isaac have done it. I stayed back in California. Isaac went to Las Vegas trying to get a job. I went through a lot of like my appointments. So I did the anatomy scan for our daughter. And like all of that, had to do that alone. And then NFL training camp ends and my husband gets released. So that was a little difficult time, but after talking with his NFL agent, his name's Brian. Everyone say, hi, Brian. I'm sure I'll refer to him a lot in this podcast. Isaac is talking to Brian. He is like, okay, so like, am I going to stay with the Raiders? Am I going to go to a different team? What happens? So after NFL cut day, basically, if you're like, some people have to go through waivers, some people don't. So my husband, because he's a veteran, didn't have to go through waivers. So when he was released from the Las Vegas Raiders, he got to contemplate the idea of going to another NFL practice squad. You can't just go to any NFL practice squad. You have to be invited to an NFL practice squad. It's not just a free for all. But my husband, after going through camp with the Raiders and after being there in Vegas for the last 3 games of the previous football season, he just knew that he was going to have the best opportunity to play. So he ended up making the decision to stay in Las Vegas. Another great, I don't know if this played into our decision. When I say our, yes, year 7 in the NFL, a lot of people would find this surprising, but my husband and I are having these conversations together. Like, should we go to this practice squad? Should we stay here? So while my opinion's not usually the number one reason he stays or leaves, it's usually like considered, which I think is very lovely. Thank you, Isaac. So Isaac made the decision to stay with the Raiders. As many of you know, he was on practice squad, but crazy enough, even though he was on practice squad, he was active in every single game. Like, he was literally playing on the 53-man roster, but like he was not on the 53-man roster. Once he did sign, no, actually, see, this is crazy. Like the NFL life, I'm just like, what happened last year? So when my husband decided to stay in the practice squad, we went and looked for apartments. And that's when it kind of became a little mentally tough. And I'm not going to try and make you guys feel bad for me ever on this podcast, but I do want to speak very candidly. I feel like once I threw out the $100,000 every football game and my husband sitting on the bench, I feel like once I threw out that, you guys are like, wait, I'm never going to feel bad for you. Totally get it. But I do want to speak very openly and candidly because I do think that some of the things or the thoughts and feelings I was having are like, I was able to feel those things. Even though like my husband has a great job, he's in the NFL, he's played for 7 years, I'm still able to like feel sad of, letting go of some of the things that I had hoped to have. And one of the things that I had to let go of was giving birth in our home here in California. So when my husband signed to the practice squad, we went and looked at a bunch of different apartments, and we were only looking at furnished houses and apartments because we're not going to move all of our furniture. We knew we were going to have a newborn baby right at the end of football season, and it just didn't make a lot of sense. And one stress that we could get rid of was moving all of our furniture and all of our shit. And with him being on practice squad and being able to get picked up at any point, we were like, you know what, let's just keep it as simple as possible. So I will never forget this. Isaac and I walked into a fully furnished apartment in Las Vegas. We're looking around. It's a nice house. It just, I don't know what it was about that house, but I got so sad just looking at the house. Like, it was nice. It had nice furniture. It had like these big open windows, and I just could not imagine bringing my daughter home there, and it made me so sad. I will never forget going out in the car and just uncontrollably sobbing. I'm pretty sure I recorded a video and posted it. Of course I did. But yeah, it was just really difficult for me to go my entire pregnancy thinking, okay, like maybe Isaac's not going to play football this season. I'm getting comfortable with the idea of giving birth here in California. And then within 24 hours notice, Isaac's with the Raiders. And then, now he's on practice squad. But we still have to live in Vegas. And just the idea of having to find a new OBGYN and having to go and do new hospital tours, all while I think I was like 25 or 26 weeks pregnant. It was just like a really big hard pill for me to swallow. Obviously, I was fine. And there's a lot of women in different, more difficult situations, but it made me sad. It kind of made me emotional. And that's just like an insight as to how I was feeling when my husband signed with the Raiders. Now, the longer we were with the Raiders, the more acclimated and comfortable I got. I found a doctor. I found a hospital. I started making friends. I interviewed a lot of night nurses and I was like, I don't want to do this. The NFL never gives paternity leave. I'm not going to give birth and my husband's going to miss his NFL game the next day. That's not how it works in the NFL. So the NFL does not have paternity leave. And in fact, they don't make you, but they suggest you schedule your birth. So when we were getting into the countdown of the last few weeks of me about to have our daughter, it came up that I was going to have a C-section because my daughter was breech. So Isaac and I are interviewing night nurses. Having a night nurse in the NFL is a very common thing, or some type of help. Night nurse, postpartum doula, having family fly in and help take care of you. All those things are very common in the NFL because there is no paternity leave. Isaac would be at the hospital for the birth and then have to leave 24 hours later. So you just need, when they say it takes a village, it really takes a village, because the fact that I almost didn't have my husband there, that would have been, well, whatever. Now, me, on the other hand, I made the decision to not have a night nurse. I was going to raw dog all of it. What was I thinking? I clearly was not, because the idea of me having a C-section and then coming home, my husband leaving for an away game to go to the Kansas City Chiefs and hang out with Travis Kelce, I'm like, hello, your freshly postpartum wife is over here. I don't know what I was thinking, but whoever you believe in, or if you think the universe or God, somebody had a different plan, and I never thought I would say this. I am so grateful that my husband was fired 2 weeks before I gave birth, because it has been the biggest blessing. So I'll take you back to the day my husband got cut, because I feel like when I talked about it on the last season of this podcast, I kind of just like brushed over it and acted like I was fine. I was absolutely not fine. I was crying every single day. It's just after me having to become acclimated with like the idea of bringing home our daughter to Las Vegas and then finding a hospital and doing all of that. And then all of a sudden they're like, actually, no. I'll take you back to the day that my husband got fired from his job. My husband and I are knee deep in an assembly instruction of a crib. We had not opened one box for our baby up until this point, and it was 2 weeks before 39 weeks, and I knew at 39 weeks I was going to have my C-section. So my husband and I are building our baby's crib, and he gets a call informing him to bring in his iPad. That is the universal language for you're getting fired. If any NFL team at any point is like, hey, bring in your iPad, you're getting fired. I instantly start crying and my husband gets in the car. He goes over to the Las Vegas Raiders facility and he is fired. Now I'm crying the entire time because I'm like, okay, what does this mean for us? I had automatically assumed in my head he was going to come back on practice squad. So he comes home and is like, hey, okay, I got cut and they're not bringing me back on practice squad. The thing about practice squad is it's 16 guys, and those 16 guys are essentially part of the Raiders. But the thing about the 16 guys is you're only allowed 4 veteran spots and the rest have to be rookies. And my husband is a veteran. So he was not offered a practice squad spot with the Las Vegas Raiders, which led us to make other decisions. Of course, Isaac calls up his agent, Brian. Hey, Brian, so what's the plan? After a lot of thinking and decision-making and considering our unborn daughter, Isaac made the decision to not take another practice squad spot at that moment. And you might be thinking, why would Isaac not take a practice squad spot? Like, you don't want to make money or you don't want to be on an NFL team? Isaac and I made the decision as a couple that it would just be very difficult to move to another place, find another doctor, find another hospital, find a furnished apartment, get our dogs out there, find like some sort of village or friends. It just wouldn't have been a smart decision. So he made the decision, okay, I'm going to go home back to California and Allie and I are going to have our daughter there. We're going to let her recover there. And a week or two after she gives birth, we can like go back to the drawing board and like decide if I want to go on a practice squad somewhere else. Because up until that point, he had not gotten a 53-man roster invite anywhere. So he decided to say no to practice squads that weren't with the the Raiders and we went back to California. Now, you know that crib that we were building? We had to put that back in the box. We had to pack up all of our daughter's things that we had nested up until this point. The thing about the NFL is wherever you're playing, whatever city you're in, that is your community. I think a lot of people forget that the NFL is your family, because having to move to all these different cities and states without your family, without your sense of community, no friends. Like, I moved to Vegas knowing nobody, and we had Thanksgiving plans with like the defensive line in 5 days. And then my husband gets cut. It's just like our entire sense of community was kind of stripped from us. Going to Thanksgiving with the Las Vegas Raiders when my husband's not a Las Vegas Raider, it kind of is giving college kid going back to high school to go to the prom. Like, we just weren't comfortable with it anymore. Not saying that like we hate our friends or now we're not friends anymore because he's cut and he has no job. No, it made Isaac feel icky. I didn't feel like I belonged anymore. It's like you lose a sense of identity in that city, which made it very easy for us to make the decision to move out of Las Vegas and back to California, especially considering it's only like a 4-hour drive. So my husband and I, at 9 months pregnant, are packing up a U-Haul, just me and him. We're putting all of our baby's stuff into this U-Haul. We're making phone calls. We're making decisions about going back to California. I'm calling up my OBGYN back in California like, hey, I'm coming back. I'm also due in 2 weeks. I need a C-section. And let's just say my water breaks on the drive home from Las Vegas to California. Do I keep driving? Should I turn around? Like, it's a whole thing. So Isaac and I end up moving back to California. We have our daughter there, and I am so incredibly grateful that he didn't have a job when we had our daughter, because I went through it postpartum. I'm talking like it had nothing to do with my C-section and just everything to do with like mental health. I got re-hospitalized because I got an infection that wasn't even related to my C-section, but because I just had surgery, they took it a lot more seriously. And it was just, oh my God, shit hit the fan. My husband ended up not going on any other team for the rest of the football season. Did that hurt him for this football season? I mean, some might say yes, some might say no, it doesn't really impact you once you've played 7 years. But I think that no matter what, I'm very confident in the decision that we made for our family. And I'm so grateful that my husband has been home, because you just can't get those moments back. Like the first few days of our daughter, Isaac driving us home from the hospital. If I had given birth in Las Vegas, my husband wouldn't have even been able to drive me home from the hospital. He would have been on a flight to Kansas City to hang out with Travis Kelce instead of his newborn baby. I would have been calling an Uber and driving through the Las Vegas Strip like, hey, I just gave birth. So I'm very grateful in hindsight. I know at the time it was very difficult. I was a hot fucking mess. I was crying every day, but I'm so grateful for how it did happen. And now that my husband is still currently not on a team, I'm also trying to be grateful. I actually made a TikTok about it the other day saying that like in the moment when my husband lost his job last year, it was a hot fucking mess. And now in hindsight, I'm grateful that he lost his job. So now that Isaac is still home and NFL cuts are about to happen and preseason's almost done, I'm trying to be grateful for these moments that he's still here. I mean, he's able to still hang out with our daughter, and he's able to support me while I'm doing things for my dreams. And I'm really just trying to be thankful, although obviously I would love him to be on a team. So now the question is my husband going to be on a team this year? Is he retiring? So at this current time, my husband is still pursuing the NFL. He is a free agent. Throughout the preseason, like teams reach out and they say, oh, like I'm interested, yada, yada, yada. My husband still wants to play football. He loves the game of football. He is a super competitive person. And he's like, you know what? I just have juice left in the tank. So I have a feeling we're going to have to pull him away from football, but I'm not going to pull him away just yet, because I would love for my husband to play one more year, especially just considering like, okay, he got drafted when we were in college, and then we started dating, and then we got engaged, we got married, I was pregnant, and now that we have our daughter, I would just love to like tie our NFL life up with like this bow of like having our daughter come to a game. Now, I can't really make those decisions, and the NFL isn't going to be like, oh, Allie wants to bring her daughter to a game, put Isaac on a team. The crazy thing is that I have never thought my husband wasn't going to be on a team up until now. Obviously, I'm just like forced to think about that. And it's a little difficult because our identity and our community, all of our friends who have became family, all of them are in the NFL. And so the idea of him retiring, it makes me sad. Obviously, one day it's going to come. Yes, I will still stick with my husband even when he retires and he's not on an NFL team. But I am going to be sad for when that day comes because I've loved this chapter so much. But I have a feeling it's not over yet. So that kind of leads us to current date. We are currently living in California. Isaac has his phone, loud ringer, because we're just waiting on a team to call. So I'm sure that like throughout football season, I'll continue to update you guys when he signs with the team. You guys are going to be the first ones to know. I'm going to sit down in this chair, record a podcast, and upload it. So you guys, this is where I'm going to be announcing that. But yeah, I'm really grateful for like our story and like how everything came to be. Now, speaking of NFL preseason happening, it's about to end. So the time you guys are listening to this, if you're listening like when it's released, which if you're not, you're a fake fan. But if you're listening when this podcast is released, NFL preseason is about to end and infamous cut day is here. So during NFL preseason, all NFL teams start with 90 guys and it's a 5 or 6 week period. You have the preseason football games that don't matter, but they matter for the players. They just don't matter for a team's record. So you guys have probably seen football on your screens, but like none of those games have mattered. Now, all 32 NFL teams are about to go through NFL Cut Day. Now, what is NFL Cut Day? NFL Cut Day is when all 32 NFL teams go from 90 guys to 53 and then 16 on their practice squads. That's a lot of guys losing their jobs, a lot of girls crying. I'm usually crying, but I'm not this year, going unscathed this year. Now, all rosters have to be final on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so all rosters are ready to go on Tuesday for the rest of the football season, but the most movement that happens in the football season is usually NFL Cut Day and the few days after NFL Cut Day, because a team might be looking at another guy in a different team hoping he gets cut. Once that guy's cut, they might pick up him and then they have to cut somebody from their team. There is so much movement in and around the NFL around NFL Cut Day. And it's not just Cut Day. It's also the days after Cut Day, all the way up until the season starts. And even the first few games of the NFL season, there's a lot of movement. The thing that starts off NFL preseason is NFL training camp. NFL training camp is the hardest time in the NFL for these NFL players. And over 40% of injuries in the NFL happens in the first 2 weeks of preseason. Because imagine going from not working out every day or like gently working out to someone being like, hey, you need to run a marathon today with full pads on and a helmet. So a lot of guys start to get injured towards the beginning of training camp and even towards the end of training camp, just because going through like this hard, rigorous workout for weeks on end after going through NFL offseason, it's a lot. The first day of NFL training camp is a physical. That's when they're checking out these guys, making sure they're okay before they're putting them out on the football field. Like, they don't want to be held liable if somebody breaks their leg. They're like, was your leg broken before? And you just are acting like it's our fault, because then they have to pay, which I'll get to that in a second. Second day of NFL training camp is conditioning test and intro to training camp. Think of this as like syllabus week, except they're not drinking. Well, they might be drinking like protein shakes and a fuck ton of Celsius and pre-workout, because I'm sure they are tired. Third day of NFL training camp is practice. And this is like the acclimation period, because you're not allowed to wear shoulder pads. And the NFLPA, that's different from the NFL. The NFLPA is a players association, so they're to protect the players. They negotiated that they need to have this acclimation period back through training camp, because they don't want to have their guys being injured. They want to mitigate risk and injury. So they have this acclimation period. Now you might be thinking, so during NFL training camp, what are you doing, Allison? I'm sitting on my couch waiting to see if my husband's going to get a job. That's what they're doing. A lot of people and their families don't move out to the city that their husband's playing in until after NFL preseason ends and right before the season actually starts, because there's a lot of movement in and around the NFL. Now, speaking of all this movement happening, not only on NFL cut day, but also the few days after cut day, my husband, when he was with the Cleveland Browns 2 years ago, he survived NFL cut day. I was like, oh my God, this is great. He was on the 53-man roster. We're all celebrating. Now, just to give you guys a gist and behind the scenes of what an actual NFL training camp looks like, it is very important for players, and I'm going to show you how that is in the story of my husband. So 2 years ago, my husband was playing for the Cleveland Browns, and he signed after OTAs, which OTAs is during offseason. That's a different topic for a different episode. All you guys need to know is that my husband signed to the Cleveland Browns during the offseason, and after signing to them, he knew they had a really good defensive line. After watching the Cleveland Browns draft guys and pick guys up and trade for guys, he was like, I don't think I have a chance to make this 53-man roster. So as it goes into training camp, he is like the last person on the defensive line. He has to work his way up. So at the beginning of training camp, he was like the last guy, and then starts working his way up, and he's working out with the threes and fours, third string and fourth string. That's what that means. And then eventually starts working out with the twos, and then eventually is with the ones. And he's like, wow, I think I actually might make this 53-man roster. But like I said earlier, there's a lot of politics in the NFL. So my husband, even though he was practicing with the ones, he survived. He survived NFL cut day 24 hours after the Cleveland Browns decided they wanted a player from a different team, and they had to make room on their roster, and Isaac was the first guy to go. My husband is what I can describe as like a bubble guy. So there's 53 guys on an active roster, but you got to think, who's 54, who's 55, who's 56. So my husband got a spot on the Cleveland Browns practice squad, which really didn't fucking matter, because the first game of the NFL season, my husband started. He started ahead of guys that were on the 53-man roster, but he was on practice squad. So that's why I can't take these Brads and Chads seriously when they're like, your husband sucks, that's why blah, blah, blah. No, Brad and Chad, if you knew anything about football, like if you actually knew about football, you would know that there's a lot of politics, and it actually doesn't have anything to do with you being good. Well, I mean, sometimes it has to do, a lot of the time it has to do with you being good, but there's also a lot of politics. And I'm not just saying that because I'm talking about my husband. There are a lot of politics in the NFL that go into it. Yeah, NFL cut day is about to happen, 4 p.m. Tuesday. I'm dreading it, honestly, even though my husband's not on a team right now. I'm just dreading it because I know it's just like such an emotional fuck to so many people. Some guys see it coming, some guys don't see it coming, and some guys are going to be shocked. So there's a lot of movement. It's all about to happen. If you guys aren't following like ESPN, well, I don't even suggest you follow ESPN, because sometimes it's just like, there's just a lot of movement. If you guys want to follow any news source, let me be your news source. Let me be your big sister. I highly recommend you guys going and following Sunday Sports Club Podcast on Instagram. I'm going to be active all day on NFL cut day, because a lot of guys are about to start losing their jobs. In fact, I'm sure if the team finished their preseason games, some guys have already lost their jobs when you're listening to this. So sad time in the NFL. Not that sad over here because Isaac's not on a team, but I'm still sad because I wish he was on a team. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This was more of a personal episode where I just wanted to recap on my life. If you guys like that, let me know. If you're like, Allie, I'm tired of hearing your story, tell somebody else's story. I hear you loud and clear. Just give me that feedback. I'm so excited for this podcast to be a platform for other people that typically don't have a platform, or even if they do have a platform, they don't have a podcast. So they can't just sit down and expect people to listen. But if you guys aren't following us on socials, follow us, Allison Kuch, on all socials, Sunday Sports Club Podcast on all socials. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast so that you're notified whenever I release an episode, which is every Sunday and Thursday. I'm going to be coming out like 10 to 15 minute episodes that are like more of the up-to-date news. And I'm going to be doing those with Isaac because I want to ask questions that I'm sure you guys have. And I'm going to be the beginner person that's like, oh, what does that mean? What does that mean? So be sure to tune in every Sunday, every Thursday. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm happy you're here, and I look forward to talking to you Thursday and Sunday.